Well, let's start. Let's
Okay.
get this official.
So I'm Stephen Parton,
Donovan James.
And we're basically just going to start talking about technology a little bit here,
Yeah.
and kind of how it's affecting relationships, perhaps. Maybe a little bit inspired by the fact that Donovan here just got back from Seoul, and I'm about to go to Seoul myself. So
Yeah.
we're thinking technology and relationships are a good conversation to have right now.
Yeah, I think so. Right.
And since you were just there, did you see a lot of people immersed into smartphones?
I mean, no more than you'd see like in any American city, really. I think it's just that when technology is more prevalent in Seoul, I mean, they have giant billboards that are TV screens, you know. So instead of like having a picture on top of a skyscraper like here on the side of a wall, you would just have a giant, massive TV screen that just constantly just shot images, you know.
so better or worse than a big image, though? I mean, where do you...
Worse. I mean, like,
Is
it was like Banksy like always said, like, they didn't ask our permission to put up these advertisements in our cities and on our planet, you know. So it's like when you destroy them, when you make them your own, you don't have to ask for permission because you're essentially taking back your own city.
Well, and that's a big part of technology and relationships, is like the advertising aspect of it, the
Right.
objectification that comes from seeing people as objects inside technology. When you see somebody as on a smartphone, when you send somebody a text,
Yeah.
you really almost start to view people as Facebook profiles
Mhm.
and Twitter profiles and their handles and URLs rather than actually the person. I mean, I grew up playing World of Warcraft and Counter-Strike and a lot of online games, and some of my closest friends, my best friends, we don't even call each other by our actual names. We call each other by the names that we had in the game, because we played the games so often together that their identity as a human being almost became synonymous with their avatar.
Right. In that case, you're like with, especially I feel like that way with Facebook statuses or Facebook profiles, and that you get a shadow of a person. It's not like you get a three-dimensional human being that you know their nuances and quirks and who they are. You get like this, you know, you get an avatar or a shadow of who this person is, and these small fragments of what they believe and what they think, you know? Like, who knows the thoughts that go through someone's head, and instead of getting all that, instead of getting a conversation, you're getting a fucking random quote that they put up about something.
And to me, that's a big danger, because now we're talking about our how do I think of it? Our identity to the world is represented by something that we filter with our ego.
Right. Absolutely.
So
heavily.
So we have something where it's like, you know, I try to only give positive or inspiring things often on my Facebook or stuff that kind of challenges thought, but at the same time, I've had sadness.
Yeah.
So if someone's outside looking in and sees all this positivity, they may be like, he never seems to be unhappy, but they're not getting that side. Whereas also there are people who are like constantly talking about their failed marriage, their kids, their alcoholism, any kind of fucked up thing. And then you start to be like, are they ever happy? Like, so you start to kind of get these identities based on something that is created by the user. And we probably know more than anybody that, you know, you're not good at judging yourself typically.
Well, no, and like I think that like human interactions or, you know, friendships and relationships come about when people aren't allowed to censor themselves, because there's this like spark of authenticity and honesty,
vulnerability,
absolutely, absolutely. That those sparks, you can think of them, you know, as like flares into a stadium. They like light the way of how the friendship and the relationship grows. You know, without those, when you just have censored human beings interacting with censored human beings, you have no flares to light the way. So it's just like you get really no authenticity, no honesty, and I think the relationship and friendship suffers because of that.
Well, and I think you miss out on, I think humans kind of have this natural tendency to want to be accepted, and that sometimes comes from the natural tendency to deceive or maybe make things seem better than they are.
From a good place, though. That's the thing.
From a good place.
That's the crazy part.
Yeah, but then what happens when you look at, and it's funny because you can look at it from the terms of advertising as well as relationships. If you and I are having a heart-to-heart conversation in person, we don't have time to think about what we're going to say and mold our text message properly so we can be perfectly ambiguous, perfectly, you know, that we can say the right thing but not without actually saying anything.
Right.
It's hard to deceive in the moment when you're in that vulnerable, like, instant reaction.
Unless you're a sociopath or something.
Unless you're a sociopath.
Right.
But you can also, but I mean, you know, the same thing with advertising. They spend days and thousands of dollars trying to fine tune a message to be perfectly ambiguous and like swaying to the public.
Right.
But what happens when you get a lot of public figures up in front of a live feed? We get blooper footage.
Yeah.
And they say some stuff they aren't really proud of.
Right.
That's a PR scandal or you know, a mess up or...
Right, because nobody can filter on the fly. But advertising also, like, essentially sells a story of who we are or who they want you to be through that product, you know? Like, when you see, this could be for, I mean, tons of products, but let's say, like, KFC.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you see his family around the table and have, like, the KFC bucket of, like, you know, totally fucked up chicken that was, like, you put grown in, like, a full-grown chicken in, like, 4 or 6 weeks. Full of steroids and antibiotics, but they're all eating the chicken and the mashed potatoes, and they're all happy and sharing a moment. You know, someone's pouring a Coca-Cola for everybody, and it's like, what are they selling? This idea of a family, and I'm sure, like in this situation, 9 times out of 10, they're all white. They're all essentially, let's say, you know, cisgendered, a heterosexual couple, which you're selling a certain type of lifestyle, a certain type of image to a culture, and that's not true for everyone.
You know? Well, and it's deceiving too. I recently saw a documentary. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, unfortunately, but it talked about how fast food is often sold as this major deal. Like the best deal you can get is this family's value, $14.99, 2 buckets of chicken, 18 biscuits, like big thing of mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese. And it's like, you can't, you know, and it's this idea of like, this is a super value. Like you can't eat healthy for this. When in all actuality, like there's so much evidence out there, and this documentary showed it, whereas like you could go get some veggies, some hummus, some rice in bulk. And just make an unbelievably delicious, like nutritious meal that will feed your entire family.
Yeah, absolutely.
For like $9.99. Yeah. You could save $5 and eat very well rather than all of this. Like
you probably have leftovers and have food that, like when you eat food that you make yourself and like you like on such a substantial level reduce the amount of preservatives and shit in there because you don't put it in there. Like rice and beans and veggies that you made yourself are so much healthier because in terms of even if like it's a healthy restaurant or something, you're still cutting out like massive amounts of sodium, all sorts of things, you know. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, you know, it goes back to the whole thing too about your body processing real food much better than anything heavily processed, you know. Which I think it's at the heart of like whether you're a Paleolithic diet, and this is off topic, but like whether you follow the Paleolithic diet or a vegetarian diet, it's just really a matter of eating real food.
Yeah.
You know.
Which again, let's bring it back to the relationship thing.
Yeah.
I almost feel like in a way the technological interaction is almost like not real food. It's the empty calorie version of human relationships. Right. So we have in person, which is nutritious and fulfilling, and that's what we digest.
Yeah.
And then we have these technological relationships that are kind of shallow.
Yeah.
And not in an egotistical standpoint, but in the terms of like they don't actually have much substance.
Right.
There's this. I mean, I've done it. I'm completely guilty of it. But when I have a lonely night.
Yeah.
I'll just send out a lot of text messages just to see if I can maybe get somebody to hang out with or just to have somebody have a conversation with me.
Right.
And oftentimes, even if someone decides they want to hang out, it's like, well, actually, no. I just wanted to make sure that I had a relationship. Yeah. And now I kind of feel like I don't want to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like,
done that too.
But it's like, and they did studies to show that like the vibrate or the ring on your phone is a dopamine release.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's. You know, that's withdrawal.
Right. Yeah. It's weird because like it's almost like I can imagine in the future like them selling like friendship apps, you know, and it would be all these different apps when you message somebody and it just pings you back. And it's not a real person. No one's actually sending it, but it just pings you back. So you get that dopamine release. You get that like ping from the universe that you matter and you're relevant. And but I think you know if we compare that idea of empty calories and let's say fast food and relationships we're forming through technology. The amount of effort put into both is incredibly similar. Like we work these jobs and we buy this food that's bad for us, and we don't work for, we don't cook it, we don't pick the vegetables, we don't grow the rice, we do nothing. We just plop down in front of us. You eat it like cows on the field, you know. Mm-hmm. And like we put no effort into it, we get no calories. And it's the same thing with like these technological relationships. We put no effort in. There's no authenticity. There's no honesty. And that's why we're not really fulfilled at the end of the day with them.
Because I think a lot of the times the way you get fulfillment is the feeling of in a way like earning something. Yeah. Honestly, yeah. And with technology, you're not really earning it as much as you're just like I'm just like fine tuning a message here and like just sending out messages where I see fit and when it's convenient. But relationships based on convenience lack the authenticity that is presented by being forced to like have a real conversation in the moment.
Right.
Where you're gonna probably say something you regret,
right.
but at the same time you maybe also really think someone's gonna call you out on it.
Right.
And you're gonna have a real conversation that starts to actually, one, give you growth, two, builds a bond because now you're talking about deep shit between people rather than just like, hey, what's going on?
Right.
Like,
I mean, there's I think it's easy to deceive and like keep a shallow front until you're called out and you're bullshit and you're humbled. You know, because then from then on, it's almost like, I don't know, it's very hard to continue on that point. I don't know who would, you know.
Well, and so that actually kind of makes me think of something I was thinking about earlier, and in a way, I feel like we're already kind of. Well, let's put it this way. There's efficiency there. There is value. Let's talk a little about the value, though. There's the fact that when I want to hang out with somebody or I want to organize something that across great distances, I have friends on Facebook who live in places all around the world who I get to keep up with regularly because of Facebook. I have, you and I arranged this conversation through a text message because it was easier to just send a text message and get to this quicker. Yeah. In a way, that's a good thing because by minimizing bullshit, we save some time by just sending a quick text message and got more quickly to the end, the face-to-face. Yeah. So long-winded transition away from that. Online dating. Yeah, yeah. It could be argued that it's almost better to have, even if it's an algorithm that maybe isn't great, tell you that you have a better chance of being connected with somebody and figuring it out right at the forefront rather than going to a bar, spending 2 hours only to find out that this person is just not going to work.
That's true. I mean, I think that's, at least that was my, when I first tried it, that's the idea, right? Like there's only so many times you can go to the bar, and if you're from, let's say, the East Coast, but you're very, like, liberal, only so many times you can go to the bar and deal with, like, conservative, let's say, Bush voters, and until you're like, I could just cut this out. I could just, choose from a group of women that would never vote for Bush, And then you're like, well, I can just make it a little bit more refined, Mm-hmm. Maybe they go back to our conversation, ate like, a certain swath of ways, or, like, thought a certain way about social issues, we're pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage, things like that. And so I think that's the idea when you get into online dating, is that you can make it more efficient and you can more quickly choose someone that you're compatible with. But I think it goes in the same thing with the Facebook statuses and the avatars. Yeah. And that we create these things to help us get closer to real relationships and help us better represent ourselves. But in the end, they're misrepresenting ourselves and they're just like a shadow of a human being. Yeah. And that's why these relationships all through online dating sometimes aren't any better because you were dishonest in some way.
They're often just glorified masks that we can just use to give the world like an outside image. Right. But at the same time, I find some value in that because even if it's an obvious mask, I almost appreciate it because I'm like, well, if I see the picture of you chugging 6 beers with your clothes off on your profile, you might be fun, but like that's not the kind of fun I'm looking for. Right. Like, but so I mean, even the bullshit is telling. The lies are almost easier to catch.
That's true.
It's easier to kind of see, like, I guess the way I can phrase it is the way people choose to present themselves says a lot about who they are.
Yeah. Or if we lie about the same things, are we more compatible then? But I mean, it'd be funny. Like, think how many people have cheated, right? Cheated like on their spouse, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And how many people actually put that in an online dating profile? I would say very few. Not that they should, because what if they learn their lesson and they truly would never do it again? Mm-hmm. And then you get into the problem of any data set. Like, what if then we're almost extrapolating a human being and all their actions as a giant data set, and we're going back in time, and it's like there's so much data that and since we don't know how the person's going to act in the future, no matter what they give you, almost is inherently inaccurate. Because there's too much to choose from, and where's the trend line? What determines how the person's going to act in the future, who they really are?
Well, and there's a situation where you have a huge thing that went on for a while that was talked about is paid services where people would write profiles for other people. I mean, if I'm, we're both writers. We both look at the written word as, a very highly valued thing. Yeah. If I'm reading someone's profile and it's full of broken English, that's a little bit of a turnoff. Right. If I'm reading someone's profile and it's grammatically beautiful, I'm like, all right, that's a good start. But what if that person had that profile written by someone else and their actual speaking version is like just full of not broken English, but
yeah.
you know, it's very trite, it's not elegant,
right.
Their vocabulary isn't very extensive. It's
yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's a thing where it's like that's a very blatant form of deception.
Right.
Because I chose to have a relationship through technology rather than face to face.
Right.
So it's a double-edged blade, but I mean, all at the same time.
And to some degree, I think there's some series of intangibles that like online dating can't grasp. So there's this weird chemistry that sometimes just occurs between two people, and as far as I know, online dating has not found a way to capture it.
And it doesn't matter what mutual music and movies you have in common.
No, just because like you both like Scrubs or Breaking Bad or something, it's not.
You both love to hike and love music. It's like, well, we live in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
Most everyone loves music and loves to hike.
Or at least says that they do.
Yeah.
Right.
The profiles usually always say they do.
Right.
You don't want somebody who limits your options.
Right, exactly.
But that goes into another thing I was thinking about. What about the future of it?
Yeah.
Where does this go? Now, we talked about the negatives of technology and relationships. We talked a little bit about the positives with online dating. I mean, I've had some really amazing dates and long-lasting relationships because I went through the bullshit very quickly by being like, oh, this person has a 90% match to me and they like a lot. Their viewpoints sound similar to mine.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some good there. What about when we're talking, let's say, Google Glasses, augmented reality, and now we're talking about having a situation where people can actually perhaps use their phone through Bluetooth or something, allow themselves to be searchable. And let's say now you're walking into a bar and your Google Glasses augment onto each person who is open for dating and perhaps says profile stats about them and things like that. What about a world where it's like, where we have like, oh, she likes these things. She publicly lists the things she likes. You have a match rating.
That's interesting.
We're talking about augmented reality. I mean,
well, I think it would be.
Is that a gain? Is that maybe a gain in the future?
Oh, I would say it's a loss. But I think first though, I think like to shed a little more detail, I don't think it's going too far to say that one, things like a lot of information would all be on there. You know, like say you could whatever Googleable about them would pop up in your little Google Glass. So you'd have like resumes, credit scores, or even so far as like what if you paid enough, like if you paid for a certain service, it would provide their doctor's visits, and all of a sudden you get, if you're in a date in a bar, you see what I'm saying? But that would appear. But then on the flip side, it seems like someone at a bar could pay to be on like a private filter, and like their information wouldn't be there. So I think like immediately once this service is available, there's going to be a way that people are going to be able to make more money off it. Google will provide services on what you can get or ways to pay more to get, and if you want to get yourself out of the service, it will allow you to pay your way out. So.
Well, and one thing I worry about a lot is, again, just like we don't know how to present ourselves, we often don't know what we want. So what if now we're going through this glorified, detailed list that somehow sums up this person's value as a human being or as a dating thing, and we're like, oh, that doesn't look good. There's plenty of times I've dated, and on paper I was like, this might not go well. But in person, it went fantastically because I don't know what I want. You know what I mean? There's
good point.
There's situations where maybe you look at that and you go, well, she went to this school and she went to this place. And our natural reaction is to, judge people, not in a way that's necessarily discriminatory, but in a way that's just like the natural reaction is to take any object, apply our experience to it, and then say, okay, well, my history with Ivy League women who are blondes and who have, a father with $1 million salary has not been good. It's a reality that you could instantly judge that, but what you might have been missing is the fact that she hasn't lived with her dad. She earned a scholarship herself through hard work. I mean, you know what I mean? We can totally misjudge the facts that the technology represents to us and end up missing out on a true connection because of that.
I mean, that's true.
I mean, to me, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of what relationships are with technology it's situational. There's obviously a ton of bad that's happening with it, but there's also a side of it that's good if you you know, if you're willing to maintain some level of discipline and honesty with the technology.
Yeah.
But where does it become? Where does it become where does it become a loss of ability to step in and say, I'm going to put it into the cultural.
I think it matters how
zeitgeist,
how addictive your personality naturally is. I mean, some people are naturally addictive, and in that situation they're going to be fucked. But like, I think we'll go back to this point of when you meet someone and you meet, like, say, the Ivy League blonde woman, and you immediately, like, place them in this box essentially in your head. I would almost defer to evolution and biology and say we evolved in such a way that our brains don't have the capacity to keep everyone in these unique boxes and have these, like, fully fleshed out humans that we fully understand at all times. You know, like, what did either of us eat for breakfast last Thursday? You know, we don't have the information to keep all these things. So when you meet someone, I think it's just more efficient for your brain to just place them in these boxes. You know, and it's harder. That's why I think people are so keen on labels. You know, because they don't have to learn anything more about the person. It's like, oh, you're this, and therefore you go in this box.
Well, humans like to control, and if we can put people in a box we understand, we know how to control that box. If I have past experience with a certain type of person, I know how to handle that certain type of person. But that certain type of person has so many other characteristics and attributes that I'm not even exploring because I've so quickly labeled them as that certain type of person.
Yeah, and there's a good chance that they're, you know, I mean, they are a unique human being. You know,
absolutely.
And it doesn't really apply, but what are you gonna do?
Well, so let's take it another step further. Let's keep pushing technology. Let's push technology to the next step where we're talking virtual reality dating.
Okay.
Totally something that neither of us can even really understand. But like, what's your your thoughts on that?
Okay, so like that goes back to this, like, the main idea in Her, which is that this guy dates an OS and just puts it in his ear. I think this is something I never really heard anyone talk about. Obviously, it could be wrong, but like, I never really heard anyone think about this. But like, what he does essentially is he puts his earpiece in his ear and it just speaks to him, you know. And it's almost like a surrogate ghost in the machine. Like, we all have this voice in our heads that just spews thoughts, right? And it drives us fucking crazy sometimes. Other times it's enjoyable, and other times, you know, the Buddhist idea of enlightenment is when you realize that voice is just a thought. And it's not, your identity does not hinge upon it. That's another topic for sure. But like, I think it's interesting that, like, this guy's idea of happiness in Her was that he had a voice in his head that just told him whatever made him happy.
Yeah.
Like, that was a huge crux of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, is this all we want? We don't need the companion. We don't even need the physical side of sex necessarily. We just want this, like, this thing in our voice, this voice in our head to be just constantly assuaged, constantly pleased with whatever emotion we want to hear, with whatever joke we want to hear.
We want validation.
Yeah, yeah.
We want somebody to give a shit about us.
Yeah. But
that's the question: is when does that ignorance is bliss mentality almost become detrimental? When is it a situation where having that little voice that constantly listens to your problems, that says good night to you before you go to bed, that says good morning to you when you wake up?
Yeah.
When does that almost like yes man mentality that lacks maybe any real feeling behind it and it's just programmed interaction, when does that become no longer validating and actually detrimental to the point where we're completely relying on that?
Yeah.
Rather than going out and finding somebody who will lay in bed next to us?
I would say it's immediately detrimental. I mean, like, I don't think there's anything to be gained from escaping reality. I mean, this is the Buddhist in me, but like, like, there's not that there's a reason. It's just the fact of existence is that you were popped out of this vaginal portal into this ape, and now you exist, and you have this consciousness, you know. And to immediately just like disconnect yourself and like silence the voice in your head and escape from reality into this designed reality that you control more of. I think control is a huge part of it. Is essentially to do a disservice to your existence and to burn and waste your existence.
Yeah. Okay. I slightly playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Going down a little bit of a farther path on that.
Yeah.
Sticking with virtual reality. If we're talking a future where, let's say, we have virtual reality where it's relatively fully immersive, we're talking ability for a brain-computer interface to trigger or fire a synapse or a neurotransmitter with a certain chemical.
Mm-hmm.
You say you're born into this reality. Well, let's talk psychedelic drugs. Let's talk virtual reality. What is reality? Is reality just what we perceive? Because if you're on a psychedelic drug, your reality is insane shapes
portals opening up, lines, bright colors. There's all kinds of whole different universes that you're exploring.
I know.
Yes.
Well,
but the same. But if we're talking fully immersive VR, is it? If we get to that point, is this phase of shallow communication worth the fact that maybe one day we'll get to a point where you build a virtual world with your thoughts. Your thoughts can actually manifest a virtual world of your creation.
Yeah.
So can another person. So can mine. Everyone has this ability. And let's say like in Gattaca, where you take a piece of hair and you hand it to the other person, you say, tell me if you're still interested.
Yeah.
What about when we're at a point where it's like, you can actually walk another person's mindscape. You can go into their dreams, into their virtual reality, and you can get this really pure insight into them. Or let's just say you have virtual sex, and the same transmitters fire as if it was.
It's no different, right? Well,
is it worth going through the bullshit to get there? Is that any less real at that point?
Well, to go back to the whole, if it's not earned, it means slightly less to you. Yeah, I think it would mean slightly less, unless the earning of the sex was programmed into the same virtual reality. But then you're really just recreating reality. But like to go back to the psychedelics and virtual reality comparison, two things. One, psychedelics is essentially, I don't know if it's so much reality is changing in that it's a different state of consciousness. Okay. There's analytical states of consciousness like software programming or like Excel, math, and then there's and caffeine, you're really hyped up. And there's one laid back and you're just this like lazy, humid summer Sunday, and you're just on a hammock. And then there's like psychedelics, and then there's like sex at the peak of an orgasm. All these things are different states of consciousness. And to go even further, another thing about a psychedelic trip and how it differs from virtual reality is that because virtual reality is literally like it's not so much a state of consciousness as it is a supplement, a different reality. But two, all these other things I just named, all these states of consciousness are a trip. They're like you're on it for this period of time, and then it essentially ends, and you're more or less back to some state that you have always been in. You're different for sure. You have different experience. But you always return. So I mean, if we use virtual reality in that way to where, and it could be like, hypothetically, it could be incredibly beneficial. Like think of like the advances in psychology you can make. So you have like a racist asshole. You put them in a virtual reality simulator. You have them grow up as like a black kid in 1960s,
and instantly they are gaining empathy beyond belief.
Well, yeah, or you could that could be like 30 minutes to them in like in our actual reality, and it could be 10 years in the virtual reality, and they come back a different person.
But again, much like a drug trip.
Yes, exactly.
And that's my point, where I think it's hard to actually say that they are different. I agree that the time limit creates a difference. The fact that there's a limit that we're like, all right, I'm going to go up, but then I'm going to come back down. But at the same time, if you look at the Matrix theory, you look at a lot of the ideas that we are a simulation. You look at photons, and you look at whether a synapse fires or not. It's a 1 or a 0. Yeah. We have a lot of these things where a neurotransmitter can fire. It's 1 or 0. Yeah. What's a psychedelic drug doing? It's flooding neurotransmitters. Yeah. It's flooding your brain with chemicals. Right. Now, if you can have a implant in your brain that does the exact same thing,
is buying the ticket for a mushroom trip on psilocybin any different than buying a virtual trip into, let's say, like an Avatar dream world? I mean, where does the line actually get drawn when there's no difference? It's just, do you trigger the neurotransmitter with electric energy, or do you transmit it with food?
Well, I think that argument is good, but I think it falls into the same problem that materialists who say there's not a soul falls into. I'm not saying there's a soul, but I'm saying that until science finds a way to prove that consciousness is 100% materialistic, then you can't really say that in some way consciousness is not materialistic. Again, I'm not saying there's a soul. I'm just saying by definition. And I feel like that argument makes the same thing. Like, we would have to have such a mastery of the brain to tweak all these just trillions of knobs in such a way to produce the exact same thing in someone. So I'm not saying it couldn't be done. I think it's definitely out there. I mean, it's definitely it'd be hard to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's just the I guess the real question there is what defines a relationship as a real relationship. If we're doing it in a virtual world where all same chemicals are firing, and our perception is thus that we really can't tell a difference between reality and virtual reality, then are we losing anything? Because what if I go to a virtual bar and I get turned down by a virtual woman who's backed by an actual person in the real world?
Yeah.
She can still turn me down.
Yeah.
Here's the unique circumstance. Undoubtedly, when we get to that point in technology, there's also going to be the case where it's like, well, I don't actually need to go to the bar. I can program an artificial intelligence woman who looks like
who would not reject
anyone I want, and who will not reject me. Right. So now you're talking the quick dopamine release, the superficial, very lacking in substance relationship, very shallow connection, versus the other one. But now you're looking at a situation where we're talking about this bridge currently between non-virtual, non-internet-based communication versus in-person communication. Yeah. But that same exact dichotomy that we're actually struggling with understanding now exists in the virtual world. And now we're talking about in a way where it's like, what is there a difference here? So
I think inherently though, I don't know if like I agree that, I mean, unless I agree with it if you didn't know that it was a virtual world. If you really thought that was the real reality, then they're the same. But if there's even a small layer of disconnect, if like, because what's going to happen is that it doesn't matter. It's going to come into play. Like this isn't real life, or this isn't like a real situation, or I'm not really going to die. Yeah. And therefore, there's this like element of fear, and I don't know, this like I don't use authenticity again, but like this like current to existence that I think if you know it's fake, then you're going to lose. However, if you really believe that the virtual reality is real, I can't argue that it'd be any different.
What's fascinating to me, I guess, is when I look at technology and its effect on relationships, the thing that I continually go back to is it's not the technology, it's the people using the technology. The problem is, where does the cultural zeitgeist become so persuading and so influential and so consumeristic that we don't have the ability to do the right thing, to not be addicted. Yeah. I mean, we have the situation where rather than go out and try to be with friends or meet a woman outside in the real world, or a man, or whatever your sexual preference is, you just stay home and masturbate using porn on the internet. Right. Same with the virtual reality. You can take the technology and make it this unbelievably, massively invasive, different entity that is just completely changes the way human beings live. But you can still have a person who decides to stay home and use the bot, the simulated robot that they decide to fuck, rather than going to the virtual bar. Yeah. So for me, a lot of what I see with the relationships and technology is not so much the technology itself, but it's the people using the technology. Yeah. So then maybe my big question is not, is the technology dangerous, but how do we make it so that the people using it have an awareness and a mindfulness of it that is balanced?
Yeah.